Now, in addition to Stalin's suspicions about Germany, he also had deep suspicions about Britain and France. Stalin and Lenin had believed, and with some degree of justification, that the first act of any member of the capitalist world, any kind of capitalist nation, that their first act when encountering a workers' revolution would be to put it down, to crush it. And lo and behold, between 1918 and 1921, there is an Allied intervention in Russia. The British, the French, the Americans, and the Japanese, with the help of the Czech Legion, wage war on the Bolshevik regime. And Winston Churchill is most candid about this when he says that Bolshevism should be strangled in its cradle, throttled in its crib, something like that. And so Stalin, when he looked at the British and the French in the 1930s, was absolutely certain that they had not changed their tune. Britain in 1924 signed a trade agreement with the Soviet Union, and relations for the 1920s were reasonably normalised. But this doesn't mean that there was not a long-standing desire on the part of the British establishment to do something about the Soviet Union. There's a finite amount that can be done, but Stalin's belief was that that Nazism and Soviet communism were equally offensive to the British and the French, and that they would seek at some point to direct Hitler eastwards. Stalin's suspicions are reinforced when, at the Munich conference, the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia, which was a Soviet ally, is carried out in cahoots with the French, the British, the Italians, and the Germans, and Stalin himself is not invited. And the assumption is that some other deal has gone on, that if Hitler is allowed leeway in Czechoslovakia and potentially Poland in the future, then Hitler will agree to be a good chap and wage his war in the East, not in the West. Of course, this conversation didn't happen, or if it did, it's not apparent to us historians so far. But it didn't stop Stalin from believing that that's probably what was going on, or what was motivating the British and French. Perhaps it was, but no doubt they would have been more than happy for Hitler's next war to be fought in Eastern Europe and Russia, instead of in Belgium, France, and then in the air skies over Britain. So Stalin's decision to sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Nazi-Soviet Pact, is partly based around this. He essentially thinks, well, I will give the West a dose of what they were cooking up for me, and that if Hitler is allowed to seize Poland and is happy to have a non-aggression pact with me, half of Poland, of course, have a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, and there is a trade agreement between us, which was the other part of the Nazi-Soviet pact, then that will keep Hitler from invading me for a considerable period of time. And Stalin's assumption, and here is where the whole system becomes fatally flawed. Stalin assumed that a war in the West would drag on for 3 or 4 years, and that would give him time to rearm. That would mean that both sides would be exhausted, and Stalin would be at liberty to either A, defend the borders of the Soviet Union, or B, invade Western Europe himself when the British, the French, and the Germans have fought each other to exhaustion in a rerun of World War One. But the war in the West is won by Hitler in 4 months, if that, from April to August 1940, and then Stalin, I beg your pardon, when he witnesses the fall of France in actually 6 weeks, is outraged and horrified and said, couldn't they have even held out for 6 months? And that's at the point at which Stalin knows that his gamble has failed, and that he's now really racing for time to get ready for Hitler, who is turning his eyes eastwards. And of course, Stalin isn't ready by 1941, by June 1941, and the consequences of this are immense for the Soviet Union. Thanks, and I'll catch you on the next video.